Hello, folks, and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hi, folks. Welcome to the show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm just delighted to be here and have you listen to the show and watch it. I also want to mention, I've mentioned this in the past, that little clip, that video, which I show you prior to the show, was created by a dear friend, Isaac Oziel, who passed away probably about 4 weeks ago, something like that. He was a young man in his early 50s, and he and I spent an awful lot of time together on technology, and he helping push this podcast forward. And that video is one example of it. He really was an interesting guy. His very last project on this earth was actually developing and creating a new Siddur for the Sephardic shuls. And it was very, very special. And he was a special person. So God bless his soul. I miss him dearly. And I thank him so much for helping me in terms of the success that I've garnered so far through this podcast. I am also very excited to tell you that there are sponsorship opportunities and advertising as well. And if you'd like to know more about it, just email me at avrum.rosensweig@gmail.com. We also offer shout outs. If you want to say Refuah Shalema, that's Jewish, Hebrew, for get better to someone whom you love, Mazel Tov, congratulations. Please give me a shout and we'd be happy to facilitate that. I am really, really excited to have as my guest today, Alan Simons. Alan, how are you doing?
I'm fine, and I'm very delighted to be with you today.
Yes, and I am delighted to be with you too, not only because you have a beautiful British accent, but because you're a very erudite man. And I want to tell my listeners a little bit about you. Alan L. Simons. What does L stand for, by the way? Leslie. Okay. You ever use that word, that name? Leslie.
No, I use it mostly. I use it in terms of my my books, but I just name Alan L. Simons.
Your mom, when you were younger, she go, no, Alan Leslie, like that, right?
No.
Leslie, we will not mention it again. So Alan was born and raised and educated in England, London, England. And there he worked for various newspapers, as well as served for a number of years in the British Army. He emigrated to Canada during the Trudeau era and resumed his career in the newspaper and magazine field. Now, here's a very interesting piece, which we will cover a little bit later on. He served as the Honorary Consul of the Republic of Rwanda to Canada from 1999 to 2002. Alan has lectured and designed courses, as well as being a moderator at numerous institutions in the area of therapeutic management, communication, and religion and politics. He's a publisher of a respected international news and video service dealing with issues relating to terrorism, intolerance, antisemitism, hate, and ethno-centric violence. After living in Amsterdam for a few years, he returned to Toronto and is presently working on, what would be your 7th book or your 8th book? Your 8th book. Wow, that's phenomenal. Which addresses cultural diversity. He's an author, a writer, social and allyship advocate, and a public speaker. He's a member of Playwrights Guild of Canada, Alliance for Jewish Theatre, and Canadian Children's Book Centre, PAL Toronto, PAL Toronto. Well, what's Allyship Advocate? What is that?
Mostly dealing with people on a one-on-one basis. At least that's how I define it. Other people may, but it's a new word for most people. And you find various organizations and NGOs who are dealing with people and corporations. They have one individual who specializes in certain criteria, and that's what they use these days. It's a modern term, certainly not for my age, but I kind of use it because sometimes it does become.
Yes, no, and my age, I'm 64. How old are you, Alan?
I'm
No, you're
84.
not 84.
Okay, I'm not,
You're 84.
but I am.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
My God. Honestly,
Yeah.
I would put you at most
No,
early
no.
70s. You look phenomenal.
Well, we could
Wow, you
talk
look
about
great.
that. That's okay.
Listen, yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank
You
you so
deserve to
much.
hear that. I want to toot my own horn. It's such great imagery
Go
there, isn't
ahead.
it? I really wish I had a horn right now that I could actually toot. And
For
I
you.
want to do that.
Well, hold on. I've got one
Back.
here. No,
You're
no, no.
kidding.
I'm only
I thought you
teasing
had
you.
like a sax or maybe a clarinet. So this is a painting that I just finished, and it's called "The Woman at the Kotel," or the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall, and it's in acrylic. And I just want to show it to folks because you know what, I often feel like I should be showing more of my stuff. I'm not very commercial in character, and that doesn't necessarily serve me well. So I wanted to show you just this piece that I just finished, and it's for sale if you want to buy it. Yeah.
And of course, you should
Yeah,
mention
you
it
can
is on
find it on
Facebook
Facebook.
too.
Let's show it again. My commercial side is really coming out. I'm leaning to the right a little bit. There you go. Are you an artist or a poet at all?
Not a poet. That's not my particular area, but certainly I'm an artist. Acrylic mostly, and I
You
give
do,
mine
eh?
away. I don't sell them at all, but I give them as gifts, and I give them as gifts, and they're very
How
well
come you
received
never
that
sell
way.
them? Like,
Sure.
have you ever thought about selling them? Because
No,
why?
not at all. I feel Because I feel good. I feel kind of happy when someone receives something like that, especially if it's for even a bar mitzvah or a wedding and so forth. And it gives me great joy. And I think these
We
days
do.
we
We
need more
absolutely
of
do.
that.
But I will tell you something. I just sold a piece for $2,000, and it's hanging on someone's living room wall. She framed it, and it really looks stunning. There's joy in that too, and it's yeah, it's not the joy of,
Oh,
wow,
for
look at this.
sure.
I have 2 grand in my hand. I can go out and buy a Ferrari now, a little tiny toy Ferrari. But it's that you've accomplished something and people see you as a professional. So there's that aspect of art as well, right?
Hmm. I think there's also for me, it's when I go into that particular home
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
one of my pieces is on the wall. I feel good. And I see my little signature on
Yes.
the bottom right hand corner with a date on. And sometimes one's shocked because, oh my God, I
Yeah.
did that 15, 20 years ago, and suddenly it's as
Alan,
if I
what's
did
that
it
feeling
yesterday. It's
that
just
accompanies
remarkable.
that moment when you see your art hanging on someone's? What is that feeling?
It's great joy. It's a warmth that comes from within. Okay. And sometimes I get kind of embarrassed about it too, especially if they say, "Oh, look, we've got it on the wall," because that was not the whole idea of giving it. But for me, it's personal satisfaction that someone enjoys
And
something
are
that
you
I've done before.
self-critical, or do you embrace yourself, the things that you accomplish? Will you pat yourself on the back and say, Alan, great job. I'm so proud of you for doing this. I'm proud of me. Or do you often or sometimes go to the other side, which is, oh, I can't look at my own stuff. It's too tough. It's too hard.
No, I
Yeah.
think somewhere in the middle. I certainly don't give myself a pat on the back, and I get embarrassed when people kind of commend me for some of my books or my writings. But there's a satisfaction. Let's put it that way, that I have accomplished something, whether or not it's writing for a blog for the Times of Israel or the Toronto Star or so forth. I feel I've accomplished something, and it just gives me that
So in my
satisfaction.
introduction of you, it was very sort of an eclectic approach to you and your life. You're an author, you're a writer, you're social and allyship advocate. I love that allyship thing. A public speaker, a member of Playwrights Guild of Canada, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When somebody were to ask you, a little kid comes along and he goes, Mr. Simons, what do you do for a living? Who are you? What would be your response to that question?
And obviously, since I'm thinking about that very carefully, I would say that I'm a writer, I'm an author, and I leave it like that. And then if they want to kind of proceed further and ask me questions, then I kind of go ahead. But I don't get satisfaction in self-promotion in that way. I don't tell people. I'm telling you, and you know that I've
Yes.
just started my 8th book. But I'm a very private individual, and that's how I kind of have had my life.
Is that a
suppose, more than
British
anything
thing,
else.
or is it also an Allen thing?
I think it's how one
Yeah.
has been brought up. Okay. Mostly, I think in this case, it's on my paternal side, my father's side, who were Welsh Jews and who were very quiet, and they were kind of shy. On my mother's side, it was somewhat different. But I think most of my DNA comes from
What
my
was your
father's
dad's
side.
name? And what was he like?
He was quite a character. His name was Sidney. Okay, he was a pharmacist, had a very small pharmacy, as many of those guys did in the UK at that time. There was one big, and they were in some of the large cities, but he had a small, very small pharmacy, and everyone knew him in the neighborhood, and they would call on him. Oh, in the middle of the night, for instance, they had a prescription, and he would wake up and he would just give it, and they assignments. And he had a sense of humor, but very dry, very Welsh, and he had a strong Welsh accent, and he was very proud of that. But he was a very kind, loving individual, and I had two siblings, a brother and a sister, and he worked bloody hard to accomplish things for us as well as himself and my mum.
So, do you have memories of he and you perhaps going out for an afternoon, spending time together?
Not on a one-on-one. He. All I can say is that we, on Wednesday afternoon, traditionally Wednesday afternoon in London, the pharmacies closed down. And
Yes.
he would say, okay, let's go. We're all going to Brighton, which was about an hour and a half away by car, down to the beach. And we would just get on and we would just drive there just for the afternoon and then come back. But going out on a one-on-one, he worked too hard
Yeah,
for
he
that, I
did.
think. And he didn't have much time.
Now, am I correct that you
No.
were born in 1941? Would that be accurate?
You're right. And that's how my age comes to being
I can't believe you're
84.
84. I'm aghast. But
Yeah. Yeah, I'm called a war baby because I do remember at a very young age of bombs coming down very near where we lived, and it was something certainly to remember, and I certainly remember it
so,
now.
so I was going to ask you that 1945 was the end of the war, which would have put you at 4 years old. Now, I have memories from the
Yeah.
time I'm 3. If I were to stretch it or exaggerate a bit, I could probably say 2. But you actually remember bombs coming down?
One in particular, and I like to share it with
Please.
you
Yes,
if you'd
please.
like. Okay, I've no idea what it was, but the area that we lived in an apartment block. It was 8 stories high. Okay, and every night we would go down to the basement where all of the tenants, or most of the tenants that were there at that time, would sleep. We would sleep on mattresses in the basement. It was a huge basement. And my dad wasn't with us at that time because he was in the Royal Air Force. So it was my mum. And we would go down there in the middle, early in the night, and we'd spend all night there. And there was one occasion, there was this great, tremendous explosion. First of all, you would hear the sirens go off, a warning. And at that particular night, there was an enormous explosion, obviously very near where we lived. In the morning, we all got up and we went out, and it was a whole row of stores facing our apartment that had been completely
Wow.
bombed out. Okay. And there was still smoke coming out. Now, whether or not people died, I'm sure they did, but it was just across the road from where we lived. And that I remember at that particular time. It had great significance for me.
So I was going to ask. Yes, go ahead, please.
No, please carry on.
Yeah, I was going to ask that about the significance. I remember when I was 5 years old in kindergarten, Miss Bainan was my teacher, and they instructed us at the time to go through various different exercises about protecting ourselves from nuclear bombs. It was a Cold War between America and Russia, and we would crawl under the desk, right, and be quiet.
Mhm.
And as a 5-year-old, I remember the effect that had on me. I was terrified, absolutely terrified. What was the effect of, for instance, that night or that morning on you? Did it carry over into the rest of your life?
Only as a memory, but I certainly wasn't frightened at that time. Uh, During the war, people got together, not necessarily families, but friends and also neighbors, and they worked all together. And now, has it had an effect on me? Only in the fact when I see what's happening in Israel and in Ukraine, I suppose in some way I can identify with what people are going through in those particular areas. And that's why I write about these things too. But it hasn't had a psychological effect on me. I'm still the same kind of guy as I was, years and years ago, I'm sure.
Would you say you're a courageous sort?
No, not at all.
No,
Not at
never
all.
mind. I
No.
am. It's very honest of you.
But there again, what does the word courageous mean? It comes in different
Yeah.
formats for different people, doesn't
Right.
it?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
standing on the corner of Bathurst and Shepherd these days, once a week with flags, okay, that's kind of quite courageous too, and I commend people for doing that.
Right.
Same
Because it's
as yeah,
these are Israelis and Jewish Canadians, non-Jewish as well, are standing up there in support of Israel
absolutely,
every Sunday
absolutely,
morning.
yeah.
Alan, what was your mother's name, and what sort of woman was she?
My mother's name is Rita,
Yes.
and to the family, that was her name, and she had a cousin called Little Rita.
Did she?
And you couldn't kind of mix them up because Little Rita was little, okay? But my mother had a kind of a sense of humor, and she came from a tremendous family that were quite eclectic in their own ways, and were, I would call them thespians, although they were never on the stage, and it was quite exciting, quite different from my father's family. My mother's family were very outwardly motivated. They got together very often and joked around with each other. In England, we would say they would take the piss out of each other, but in a very
Yeah.
friendly way. And that's what I remember a lot about my mother. She was a housewife, okay, and she'd sometimes help my dad in the shop, in the pharmacy. But all in all, she was a loving, warm woman and as a housewife. And that's what I really remember her as.
Do you remember any of their narratives, any of the things that they might have told you as a youngster? And I ask this question because I've discovered uh, that a comment from an adult, be it a parent or a teacher, when somebody is young, in particular a positive one, can carry you through life. And I've had that experience myself, and it was just a part of my narrative that I've carried with me all the days of my life. Are there instances when your mother will give you a hug and say, "Alan, you're just such a beautiful kid," or something like that?
I don't remember that actually. She was a very warm individual, there's no question, a pretty good cook as well, which I kind of enjoyed. I liked her wurst and eggs, which I won't eat now, but
Yes.
that was a very special thing for her. She showed her love and attention more, I think, in terms of what she would do in terms of
Yeah.
her food. And she was a very articulate woman, but I didn't come from a family that there were huggers. Let's put it
Mhm.
that way. Maybe that was the British in them, because in the UK, I'm sixth generation. Okay, though I do go back much further than that, my mother's family. But we weren't great huggers, but we were a very solid British family, and I think still are.
When you and I had breakfast recently at United, when we finished, did we hug one another? Because I am a hugger.
Well, I'm a hugger now. Yes,
Now you are a
absolutely.
hugger.
Oh, I love hugging. Yes, I'll hug anyone who
You do.
comes up and says hello. And it's kind of interesting because very often you'll meet a non-hugger. right? I'm sure you do too. And they look at you and they don't know what to do. And I have great fun out of that too. But
Yeah,
if
yeah.
I can change them, if I can change them, that's an achievement, I think. Yeah.
Good for you. I taught my mother how to say I love you. Yeah.
Ah,
She wasn't very comfortable with it prior, and then I just started telling her I loved her, and then eventually she started to tell me that she loves me. I find one of the most challenging things, but a good challenge, is if you shake somebody's hand and they will shake you back, obviously, but do so in a very light way. You know what I mean? And I'll say to them, I'll
limp,
say,
limp, very
yeah,
limp.
limp. There's the word, limp. And I'll say to them, squeezing one's hand, somebody else's hand, that's an expression of trust. And then they will get that person will ultimately squeeze my hand tighter, and I'll feel this incredible warmth between us.
Right. I kind of agree, but I'm still for being a hugger more than anything else.
You're a hugger. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a limpish as a
No,
limpish hand hugger. No, not at all. Not at all.
no, you're definitely not limpish. You're actually a very, very warm human. You're a very warm human being. You really are.
How can you be a limpish Jew? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, does it?
Now there's some limpish Jews. I know a couple of them. Yeah, but they just they've never really learned. I know a lot of people, Alan, who do not have the ability to say "I love you," or really sort of involve themselves in a tete-a-tete, which is warm, which is really questioning, and so on. And that is sometimes a function of how they grew up. I would argue maybe second generation, what we refer to as second generation Holocaust
Indeed.
survivors.
Indeed.
Yeah, sometimes just have the challenge with that, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
No, I kind of tend to agree with you on that, and there's no question about it. Yeah.
So ever since you're young, it seems that you had a fascination with words, with phrases, with sentences, writing articles. Do you have any idea where that came from inside of you?
Well, when I was young, I was the oldest in my family. Out of 3 siblings, I was the oldest. Okay. And very often I would just get on the train, the tube, go down to London, the West End, and further down into the city of London, and just walk around.
Yeah.
And I always seemed to find myself in Fleet Street. And at that time, Fleet Street was the street that all the newspapers were in. Okay. From the Times to the Daily Mail to the Daily Express and so forth and so on. And I just seemed to kind of attach myself to those kind of to those newspapers. And I always wondered whether or not I would be able to work there in one of those. And it turned out many, many years later, the opportunity came, and I did. But it wasn't in the journalist area. It was in the administration and marketing area. Right. But I was always meeting reporters and journalists from various newspapers, and one in particular, mind you, it's changed politically now, was The Guardian, which was a fine, very pro-Israel and Jewish based newspaper. The editor was Alistair Hetherington, and he was a good Scottish Presbyterian, but he loved Israel. Yes. And I found myself associated more with the editorial staff than my own staff in the administration and the marketing area. And I learned a lot from them. And I learned, especially those who were, at that time, they were called war correspondents, okay, who were either in Vietnam or had been in the Second World War as war correspondents. And I found myself having a great appreciation of them. And I suppose that's where it all started. In my kind of early 20s, if that was kind of the area that I wanted to be in. So I kind of gradually moved into writing. But it wasn't actually until I came to Canada that I had that opportunity of writing. Not necessarily as a journalist, but I formed a communications company that published. And there was one occasion where one of my reporters, or writers rather, was sick. So I said, well, if they can do it, I'm sure I can. And that's how it started. And I thoroughly enjoyed it thereafter.
What was the appreciation of the editorial side, or the war correspondence? Was it of what they did, that they would wade out into these areas of war? I interviewed a fellow by the name of Fox Butterworth, who opened up the branch of a major network in the United States in Vietnam. So he was ensconced in the middle of this terrible, terrible war. He appreciated the people there. He appreciated the courage and the bravery. He appreciated the writers and what his function was as a writer and as a broadcast. So was it what they did and how they did it, or was it the words as well?
They were, as individuals, there were about 2 or 3 of them at that time at The Guardian. They never wanted to talk at all about their experiences. Okay. But it came out in their writing, and that's, for me, that's when I started to get very interested in their content, and also as they were as individuals. And I kind of followed them for quite a few years. They're all dead now, but they were very private individuals. They kept their war experiences to themselves, and the only way that they expressed that was actually in their writings for the paper. But they were solid individuals. But you could see just by their appearance that they had gone through hell, as because they were all frontline war correspondents. They weren't writing from behind the lines. They were on the front lines with the guys who were fighting the wars.
Were they disheveled? Were they weary looking?
Tired.
They were tired.
Tired, what I remember, yeah. Tired. I mean, nearly every night, every afternoon after work, there would be a few of us that would go around to the pub for a beer before we would go home. They never did. They never associated, to my knowledge, with any other of their colleagues outside of the paper. I think they had a lot on their shoulders. Now,
Yeah.
Is that the same now? Could well be. But there again, I don't know any war correspondents these days, and I don't know if they even use that term anymore.
Well, I remember when the war broke out in the Ukraine, and there were some very high-profile journalists who went there to cover the war. And I recall thinking, my gosh, they're so much different on the air in the Ukraine versus how they are back home in New York or Atlanta or wherever it happened to be. Mm-hmm. There was a real weariness to them, a real weariness to them. You could see that what they had seen and what they had gone through in their short time was could have been terrorizing to them, could have been just so incredibly, oh my gosh, just awful to see how humankind can treat other people that way. So I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And a lot of them, there was one character, I certainly don't want to mention his name, but he was a specialist in terms of Russia. Okay. He, so I understood from some of his colleagues, he refused to sign anything. He didn't want his signature on any item, either a check or signing off on his piece of work he was doing. And to me, he followed very similar to a number of other correspondents there who were very, I won't say shy, but they were very, very private in what they experienced, and also what they shared with other people other than in their writings. And of course, there are many authors these days that do the same thing. They're very, very private, and you only experience what their feelings are through their words. And I suppose I followed that a little bit in my life.
Alan, I find the beauty of immigrants, if you will, people who come to our country, Canada now, is that I have the ability to find out more so about what is Canada? What is it like? What are Canadians like? Because clearly they're much more objective than I could ever be. Now, you came to Canada during the Trudeau era, and you're coming from Britain.
Right, 1967. I came the last day of February in 1967.
The very last day, cold winter day.
Cold. It was the coldest day they have ever experienced. And I know
Ever.
I'm kind of moving off the question here, but it was the first day that people could drink and eat at the same time. It was a Sunday, and I said, "Oh my God, where have I landed?"
Yeah,
Okay?
right. Exactly. I've heard those stories before.
Yeah.
Well, you come from a country that has quite the history, a long, long history, a warrior sort of country. People are very stoic, and you arrive here in Canada, which comparatively is a newer country, if you will. Do you remember what you were thinking at that time, other than the weather, about here I am in Canada. This is what I'm exposed to. My gosh, what a difference between where I'm coming from and to where I've arrived.
There were certainly certain situations which kind of impressed upon me. One, if you were British at that time, the chances of you having a job the next day were pretty guaranteed.
Oh,
Okay. There's no question about that. I found that it was a very waspish society at that particular time, but I found individuals very accepting of me. They knew I was Jewish. Okay. Maybe because I worked for a publishing company, a newspaper group that had a number of Jewish people who worked there. But I found it very willing. And as long as you rolled up your sleeves and worked, the chances of you making a success in this country were very, very good indeed. In addition, heating, of course, was about 1/3 the cost as it was in the UK at that time, and also the price of disposable goods. Shopping, for instance, in a supermarket, I couldn't believe the prices. They were so much lower than where I came from.
yeah.
So I only had two friends here at that particular time. So I had to make myself, out there and say who I was and who I am. But certainly the overwhelming majority of people I met at that time were very open and very kind and very generous. And I really appreciated that very much because I was only going to be here for 1 year. I had decided before I came, I'm going to try it for 1 year. But that suddenly 1 year changed to 18 months, to 2 years, to 3 years, and so forth and so on. And I'm still here.
Well, you clearly have a very adventuresome nature. And I think that's probably the distinction between other families I know who came from Britain to here, very shy people, as you were commenting on before. And they had a really difficult time. They went to Montreal, the ones I'm thinking of. And while Montreal's a beautiful city and there's so many places to visit and see,
Yep.
they were sort of very, very uncomfortable with their new environment. But I would say, and tell me if I'm correct in my assumption, that because you like adventure, because you like people, and I've seen you in action, that must have made your trip here, the change in your environment, much easier.
I think it did, but it would have come from my mother's side,
Yeah.
who were very outwardly okay. And the fact
Rita.
is, before I came here, I had traveled a fair amount around Europe, so I had experienced other countries. But this was still a colony, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
to the Brits. And I never regarded it as a colony. I regarded it as a member of the Commonwealth. Okay? And in that respect, I kind of settled down here much faster, I think, than some of the other stoic Brits that came over thinking that everything would be the same as when they left England. And it isn't. It's a different country. It's a vibrant country. And I appreciated it very much.
Did you ever have a mog?
A mog,
Maybe I didn't use that right. A cat?
a cat.
They call
No, there were times I had a dog
it a
in the
dog.
family, and that was an Airedale. And you
Oh,
don't
you had
see
an
too many
Airedale.
Airedale. Oh, I'm an Airedale fan. Oh, yes, from way, way
Beautiful
back.
dogs. But I thought
Beautiful.
they called, didn't they call cats mogs? Or am I wrong about that?
To be honest, it's the first time I've heard that.
Oh, okay. Okay, fine. I could be wrong. My friend told me this. But here's my question to you about
Yeah,
Canadians.
yeah.
And maybe you can really help me with this. I grew up
Oh,
in Kitchener, Ontario. I was born in
right,
1960. I went to public school until grade 9, and then I came to Toronto. I went to yeshiva. I have always felt that Canadians, and I have obviously had huge exposure to the country. I've been west, I've been east, and I've interviewed many, many people. I've always found that they are not, in general, brushstroke statement, not individuals who really are interested in other people's lives so much so that they would be probing of them. Now I'm probing as ad nausea, like I'm curious to a fault. So that's a bit of a problem in the world itself. But in Canada, I always felt as though I'm looking for these meaty conversations with individuals who really want to dive in, who really want to know me, who really want to understand human nature and how we move and how we change and so on.
right.
Has that been your experience or otherwise?
Sometimes you hit yourself on the head, okay? Because yes, that's something which I've always kind of thought would happen, but I've had to work very hard on it. In other words, what I suppose I'm saying is I've had to start a conversation, yeah, and not left it to individuals who may be born
Right.
here. I'm generalizing, but maybe you understand what I mean. So
Yes, I do.
it's come from me, okay, and then they open up. And sometimes I kind of wish it was the other way around, but
Right, right,
most
right.
cases it isn't. But that's the way it is. It is what it is.
Now you came to Canada and you fell in love,
Oh
and
yes.
you had a beautiful relationship, which lasted 18 months.
Well, you're jumping one love. Okay,
I'm jumping a
I was.
love.
You're
Fill me in.
jumping a love. That's a good title for a book, actually.
Yeah, jumping a
Uh,
love. I like it.
Jumping a love. You like that, do you? You could
Good
use it.
imagery.
Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
good imagery. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I came here and I got married. I think it was about 18 months later. 18 months seems to come up a lot in my life.
Yes.
Okay, not at the moment though, but it does. And I got married to a lady who came from another culture, a vibrant culture. She was from Iraq. She was Jewish. Okay, and we had three wonderful children. But unfortunately, sometimes east is east, is west is west, and it just didn't work out. And it wasn't until many years later that I met my future wife. And as I think you're just attesting, that it lasted just 18 months, or you will ask me, I'm sure. And she died. She died after 18 months that I knew her. She died of breast cancer.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. Before I dive into your second love, I just want to know about your first love. You love Iraqi food, don't you?
I think yes, I think I do, and I still love it. My mother-in-law, her name was Mama Rosa, and
Mama
I'm
Rose.
sure there's Mama Rosa, and she was regarded as the best Iraqi chef. I'm using that word, chef, in the whole of Toronto. But it was just wonderful. She was a very kind and generous person. When I used to visit her, before I even stepped in the door, there was a silver plate with some orange juice on it, uh, and some kahwa, which is coffee, Turkish coffee. And she was a very generous individual. The food, yes, I still enjoy it. And there's one Iraqi restaurant still in Toronto, in
Yes,
Kipling
yes,
and Bloor area.
yes.
I haven't been there since COVID, mind you. Uh, but I do enjoy their food. It's very succulent. It's delicious. And if anyone out there wants to send me some Iraqi food, I will share it with you without
I'll
any
gladly eat
difficulty
it.
at all.
You know, I was engaged. I was engaged to a Yemenite woman, part Yemenite, part Algerian, when I was
Yes.
in Israel in 1987. And there was another, example of when West meets East. Sometimes they collide, and they don't
Sure.
really work out so well. There's
Yeah.
just so many differences culturally. And I said to her when I left her, I had to leave. I said to her, I can't stay in this relationship because I can't take the yelling. And Alan, her response was, "What yelling? Do you
Yes.
understand that? Do you understand that?"
Oh, completely. Yes. Yes. To them, it's a discussion.
Yes, it's a
Yeah.
discussion.
And I'll just briefly tell you a kind of situation I always remember after we would have dinner, which wasn't very formal. It was thrown on your plate. Here, have chicken, have this, have kuba, have this and that.
Ooh,
We would
Cuba.
all go into the living room, and we would all sit around in a circle. The men would be one side with their beads. Okay, now this is very traditional, and the women would be another. The conversation was never in English. It was in Arabic, because even for Baghdadi Jews, as they came from Baghdad, their first language was Arabic. Arabic with Jewish inclinations to it. But there again, and I sat there and smiling, and they would look at me and laugh, okay, and they would say, "Oh, he's Inglesi, he's Vusvus, and I'm Vusvus," and I didn't understand what Vusvus was. Why was I called Vusvus? Well, Vusvus, they called me Vusvus because I had they thought, a Yiddish background, and Vus this and Vus that.
Versus
Uh,
dos.
Was is das, right? Was, dos, or das, or whatever. So, traditionally, it was pretty difficult, and I had to learn some Arabic because of that. Not too much, but I had to learn some Arabic if I
Yeah.
wanted to communicate.
Yes.
But that was the time, and I kind of accepted it because I didn't have any family here, and they became my family. And I still know a few of them, especially my nephews and nieces, and they're absolutely lovely people, delightful
Very good.
people to be with.
I want to go into your next relationship, which lasted 18 months.
Mhm.
And the epilogue, or the end of it, was when your wife passed away from cancer.
Mhm.
And I was wondering to myself, was it a situation where you packed in a lifetime into those 18 months? And at the end of it, when it was over, when she passed, did you say, "My God, am I lucky? We've accomplished everything we wanted to do"? Or was it unrequited? What did you look back and say, I just feel so ripped off here that I only had 18 months with this woman who I adored, whom I loved so much? Or was it a little bit of both?
That's a good question, and I still can't answer it properly. The 18 months flew by so quickly,
Yes.
and I focused so much on her. Okay, I had no knowledge of breast cancer at the time. I was completely ignorant. And it was just in the second time we went out, she said to me, "Alan, sit down. I've got something to tell you. And if you kind of feel uncomfortable and you want to say goodbye, goodbye." And she came out there and then she said, "I've had breast cancer. I'm in remission now. I go back to see my doctor in 1 year, but it could come back. I have had my left breast removed. And do you still want to go out with me?" And I said, "Of course I do. But I know nothing about breast cancer, and I need some books to read up on it." And she supplied me with a lot of books, but I had really no idea what I was getting into at that very early stages. And it was, I think, about 4 months later that she found a pimple on her breast, on her right breast, and then she found out that she had terminal. The cancer had spread pretty well throughout her body, through her bones, and it had metastasized quite through her body. And that time she'd lasted, and it was about a year. That's all. So I may not be answering your question because I don't know probably how to answer it. All I know is after she died, it wasn't a relief. She had given me a lot. I felt that she had given me more than I had given her. Okay,
Mhm.
in terms of individuals, she had introduced me to quite a few women who had had breast cancer, and she had supported them. And I'd learned a lot about individuals of how friendships suddenly can disappear because even in her case, she had friends before she had been diagnosed, but they couldn't handle. They couldn't. Her friends couldn't handle cancer at all or breast cancer. And she said, "Alan, it's times like this that you really start to know who your friends are." Yeah. So, in essence, she gave me more than what I feel I gave her. She gave me an awareness of people's relationships, what they go through when one of the partners becomes sick, and I think it helped. And from that, actually, I kind of worked in the hospice area where I became a volunteer,
Mhm.
and I learned a lot in that area as well. But I wouldn't have been able to do that without spending 18 months with my partner at that time. So she gave me, in essence, as I said, she gave me much more than what I think I gave her.
As time goes on, when you're with someone who's ill, um, things start to change. When they're very, very ill, it becomes more and more difficult every single day. Did you surprise yourself that you not only stayed in the game, but you were so compassionate and caring?
I don't know if the word is correct when you say surprised. In my case, I had children who were very, very supportive.
Yes.
Okay. And there was no fear of talking about cancer to them. They were still in their late teens, early 20s, but we could discuss cancer, and they knew her very, very well. She would spend a lot of time with us. So they were my backbone, so to speak, okay, during that time. Whether or not I could have gone through what I did without their support, probably not. Probably not. My partner had 3 children at that time, and it was difficult getting to know them because my focus was on her 100% exclusively. So it was some of the weeks I wondered myself whether or not I could handle it. Okay,
Yes.
it got very, very rough. Okay, but with the support of my children, we all managed it. And today I see individuals, I see young husbands who are going through the same thing. Yeah. My wife at that time, she died when she was 47, so she was quite young. But I see young men these days that seem to be able to handle it much better. But there again, the partnership relationship these days is very different to what it was when I was growing up. The male in a partnership does more work around the house, more domesticated, and I hate to use that word, but they participate more, and both of them work these days. Okay,
Yes.
so I think they probably will be able to handle it. And also these days, there's much more support for them. And I didn't have much professional support at that time. I'll end it by saying that there was one occasion after she died, I went, or I tried to get into a support group. Okay. And it was most of the support groups were for women. And they said, no, we don't want you. This is a woman's group. Okay. You're on your own, so to speak. I don't think these days that would happen at all. But I felt very kind of lonely and very kind of left out because
Of course.
there was no one. But times have changed, and that's why I kind of quite a few years ago I wrote about my experiences because there were many books written by women for women on the case of breast cancer and terminally ill patients. And I said, hey, there's not very much out there from the perspective of what a man goes through. And that's why I wrote the book 18 Months, A Love Story Interrupted.
Ellen, a few weeks ago, I interviewed a woman by the name of Becca Slider. Becca evolved away from being a pastor in the Anglican Church, I believe it was, to becoming very free, secular in nature, sexually understanding herself more so. She talked about her physical and aspects of her body where she had had surgery and she was very, very scarred. And I asked her in that interview if anyone that she had been with, any man whom she had been with, had kissed her scar. And she smiled and she said, it's interesting that you're asking that, because the answer is yes, somebody had. And when you're talking about your wife who passed away, what was her name, by the way?
Pam.
Pam. I was wondering to myself, you met her, she had already lost a breast. And I'm curious about that in terms of the comfortability that you would have with intimacy with someone who had gone through something so big. It's, you know, and having to deal with that. Were you good at dealing with that intimacy in that environment?
It made no difference to me. Okay. And it made no difference in terms of, I saw her as an individual, not as an individual who had lost one breast. Okay. And we made fun of it quite often. We would joke and she would say, look, you know, I only got one breast. What do you think of that? And so forth and so on. Maybe that was her way of giving me that support I needed. But to me, it made no difference at all. And we never really discussed it in any serious manner at all.
Okay, thank you.
She was an individual, as all women are, whether or not they lose one breast or two breasts and so forth. And one should appreciate that individual as a human being, not because they're an amputee of some kind. And I would firmly believe that to be true for many guys these days.
Thank you for answering that question. Well, how long ago did she pass, Pam?
She died in my mathematics is not very good these days. She died in 1996.
Okay. So that's close to 30 years. Have you been in love since?
Yes.
And was it nice?
It is nice.
It is nice. Okay, good.
And I'm going to leave it like that.
I can see. Which is great, because it gives us a chance to talk about your books. Now, you're a very erudite fellow. You have a wonderful vocabulary, great stories to tell. Just one area I want to touch on before we dive into your books is that you worked in an ambassadorial capacity through Canada to Rwanda, and that was after the genocide. Just a very vague question. How was that?
Well, again, you know, a story within a story, and
Yeah.
I always believe when you're asked a question, okay, there's always a story within a story.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
suppose that's why I write, okay, in terms of my books. It all started because of one of my daughters was at University of Toronto at that time. She was doing international affairs, and she got very involved in knowing more about Rwanda. And this is when the genocide was taking place. Well, there were quite a few genocides in Rwanda, but we're talking of the 1994-96 to 96 genocide, when in 100 days, approximately 1 million Tutsis were massacred, were killed, were murdered, be it young children, babies, and so forth and so on.
And moderate Hutus as well.
Moderate Hutu as well, yes. And I had always taken an interest in what my kids were doing. And I said to her, what's this all about? Rwanda, Burundi. I remember there was a nation. She said, no, it's Rwanda now. It was a colony, first of all, by the Germans, the Belgians, and then the French took over. And she said, there's a massacre going on. I'm going to do something about it. And she did. And unfortunately, she didn't get much, and maybe you can understand this, she didn't get much of an interest from our Jewish diaspora. Okay? Where she got an interest in terms of what was happening was from the non-Jewish diaspora, and also mostly from the churches, who helped her raise an inordinate amount in terms of clothing and money too, to send over there. And what happened was, obviously, she starts in introducing me to Rwandans who were here. They were students at the university, and the vast majority, 90-something plus percent, had suddenly become orphans. Yes. There was no one left within their families in Rwanda. So they were left out of everything. So I acquired quite a few friends at that time. And and it's very difficult for a lot of people to understand. But when a Jew meets a Rwandan, there's something you can identify with. They don't have to say anything, but there's something that comes from here and the soul that you know that you have something in common. And that's what I found out about the vast Rwandans that I met, male and female here, that we had something that we couldn't talk about and we didn't know, but there was something that brought us together. And through knowing quite a few of them, I kind of started to talk at various meetings about what was happening in Rwanda and so forth and so on. And the short story ends by I'm asked, would I be interested in becoming the Honorary Consul for Rwanda in Canada, which took quite some time to be approved by the Canadian government. Simply because, and I'm not saying anything I shouldn't here, is that the External Affairs Department, the African desk, was pro-Hutu at that time. And they did their darndest to make sure that I didn't become the Consul General. However, those times are over now. And but it was tough going to begin with, tough going indeed. But I had a community here, and I still do, and I still participate in all of their affairs, and they're wonderful people. They're like Jews. They believe in education. They're lovely people. They are very welcoming. They're very supportive of Israel. They are absolutely zero anti-Semitic, zero. And they are a sheer joy to be with.
Yes, and I've done a number of different interviews with people who are either Rwandan or have an affiliation with Rwanda. Most recently, I did an interview with my friend Provi, who lost most of her family in the genocide of 1994, together with Elizabeth Marin, who's an American author and journalist, and Tully Nates, who is the founder of the Johannesburg Genocide and Holocaust Center. And it was a fascinating discussion. People can see it on my page on YouTube. But you tell a wonderful story about a reception that you were at, and there were Rwandans there, and I believe there were Israelis there as well. And you made what we call in Yiddish a shidduch. You were a matchmaker. You brought the two together. Tell me that story.
It wasn't Israelis, it was Holocaust survivors.
Survivors. Yes,
and what at that time the former president, the former Rwandan former president's wife, was in town to thank various organizations, NGOs, and hospitals for their support during that genocide. And I said to my friends at the Congress, as it was, wouldn't it be interesting to get the Rwandan survivors and the orphans who are here together with Holocaust survivors because they have something in common. Okay? Age, certainly not, but they certainly can identify. And they went ahead, and we had 2 lunches. We had, in one side, we had the Holocaust survivors, and then the Rwandan survivors. And after lunch, and the former president's wife was there too, it went quiet. And suddenly one of the Holocaust survivors stood up and said, I have a story to tell. I never told this particular story even to my family, but Rwandans who are here, your family, and I want to share it with you. And she told her story of what happened to her during the Holocaust. A few minutes later, one of the Rwandan women got up and she said, I would like to tell you my story of what happened to me in Rwanda and with my children. Now, for Rwandans at that time, they were very reticent of telling their stories, and they didn't share their emotions, they shared it within, not now, but within. So it was a great effort for this Rwandan lady to tell her story. And what it did, it started other people coming up. Alternately, a Holocaust survivor would come up with a story, and then another Rwandan would come up. And it went so well, and there was no media there. Media were not accepted into the lunch. It went so well that there was a second lunch, and media were actually, I just think the National Post was invited, and they did a massive story, a 4-page story on it. And what happened was, at that particular time, the Holocaust survivors invited the Rwandan survivors, as I call them, over for a Shabbat meal. Okay? And it progressed, that became great friends. I don't think there are too many Holocaust survivors who are there who are presently alive, but it is still remembered at any Rwandan festivity or meeting. And I'm part of their community, and I'm very proud of that. But it was quite a wonderful, wonderful thing that the Holocaust survivors opened their arms to these young people, and the young people at the time when they were still late teens or early 20s, okay, and said, we understand what you're talking about and what you went through, okay, and we have something in common. And it's still in effect.
Yeah,
now.
a number of years ago, I was working to help protect a Roma family here in Toronto who were being sought after by the RCMP and the government to be deported back to Hungary, where they were being sought after there by neo-Nazis. And the government here was not very friendly to this Roma family, and they had been put up in a church on the west side of Toronto.
Mhm.
So I would go up, and I would, the
remember that,
Pasumas,
yeah.
and I would often go visit them. And there were a couple of times where I took Holocaust survivors with me. One, I believe, was Nate Leipziger. God bless him. He is with us. He should be healthy.
Mhm.
Nate.
Absolutely.
And it was really, honestly, in
Yeah.
terms of my activism, one of the most poignant moments that I could remember, seeing Nate sit there, listen to the Pasuma stories, and then the Pasuma would do the same and hear about Nate's story. And there was a symbiosis there. There was a certain magic that was going on in that room, which was powerful and palpable. So I understand what you're telling me, and I can almost imagine what that moment was like for you. It must be very, very powerful.
Mhm.
And still is.
And still is.
Alan,
And still
you are a writer,
Yeah.
a very prolific writer. You haven't written 1 book, you haven't written 2, you haven't written 3, you've written 7 books, right? Here are some of the titles. I just love your titles. The Village of Little Figgy on the Duff. and I think to myself, man alive, where is he sitting when he comes up with these titles? The Village of Little Pletzel on the Zump. Okay, we got to figure out what a Zump is in a few minutes. The Children of the Forest. Just wonderful stories. And then the last one, we'll jump right to it, Sweaty Cats and Baby Pigeons. Right? So while telling us about the titles, because it's always a fascinating piece about writers, how they come up with their titles. In fact, I started a writers club recently, And that is going to be one of the topics in coming weeks. Where do you get your titles from? How do they jump out at you? Do you think them through? Do you see them written on a poster somewhere? So tell us about the titles, and then tell us about your approach to writing in these books.
Okay. First of all, the Figgy books, it's a trilogy. The first one was called the Village of the Little Comley on the Marsh. The second was the village of the little village of Pletzel on the Zumpf. Zumpf is a marsh.
Okay,
is
good
a
word.
marsh. Okay. Zumpf, right. It's a lovely word.
My gosh, this is Zumpy.
These days.
Yeah, very marshy, right? Yes.
Right, absolutely, at the moment. And the third book, which came out in June of last year, The Village of a Little Figgy on the Duff, it's all about Newfoundland.
Yes.
Okay, and Labrador. And the terms I use in the book do relate certainly to that wonderful province that has produced marvelous actors and marvelous writers. So what I do is I look for certain issues. Pletzel, for instance. Okay, a pletzel is a something you eat. I don't know if you've ever had a pletzel. Okay, if you were from Montreal, you would certainly know what a pletzel was. But pletzel actually is French. Okay, those Jews who live in France, in Paris, and there is a restaurant called Pletzel. Okay. And they make, they're bakers, and they make these little pretzels. It's not a pretzel, it's a pletzel. Okay, a pletzel, right? And it's quite delicious, quite delicious. So I took that out of context, and I named the book "The Village of Little Pletzel on the Duff." In Children of the Forest, that was something very different for me, and it took. I was dealing. Basically, I wanted a fictional embellishment type of book that related to, what can I say, a European tradition of folk literature that consisted of, what can I say, a mystical, Kabbalistic, esoteric, klezmerizing, as I call it, all encompassed in one. So I started to read a book by a fellow called Don, okay? His name is Joseph Dan, sorry, not Don. The Anthology of Jewish Mystical Experiences. It's a magnificent book. He was one of the leading authorities in terms of Jewish mysticism. And as I read it, I found a number of chapters in it that I kind of wanted to use. And one of those chapters dealt with a story based by Rabbi Nachum of Bratslav, who lived in 1800s, about, I think he called it the story of the seven beggars. And I was fascinated by that story. And I said, okay, is there something I could write which would be similar, but in a different vein? So that's one of the issues, or the topics rather, that I wrote in The Children of the Forest. But it is, originally it was for older children, but then I said to myself, well, hold on now. This is for adults, because I'm mentioning a lot about mysticism, a little bit about Kabbalah, which my knowledge of Kabbalah is very limited. But I know about European traditions in terms of writing folk tales and so forth. So I put it all together, and the content of it really deals with the lives of two Polish characters, Zusa and Motka, who were 9 and 11, I think, at that time. They were Polish, Jewish born, and they lived in 1941. Okay. And I follow, through my writings, I follow a tale of them throughout their lifetimes, who they met in the forest, some mystical individuals who had disabilities. Okay, one couldn't hear, one couldn't see, one stuttered, one had disabilities, and so forth and so on. And those characters reappear as klezmerites, as I call them, a number of years later, and the two children follow them and join them. and the stories about the 5 klezmer musicians and the 2 children and what happens to them, and the stories that one of the children tells. And she became quite a well-known storyteller within the book, as they follow very small little communities in Poland, which had a sizable Jewish community before they were all massacred in those towns. And I mentioned these various towns. What happened from that book was kind of interesting, because I got a few calls, one from California, one from the UK, from very esteemed musicians who said, this sounds a good book, and maybe we could write a musical about it. As things happen, timing's everything. Nothing worked, and I felt I was losing total control of the book, and that wasn't what I wanted.
Yes.
But I felt good about it. In terms of Sweaty Cats and Baby Pigeons.
Yes, I was going to ask you.
Right. Well, if you'd like, I can tell you.
Yes, please.
Right. These days, of course, many grandparents don't live in the same neighborhood as their grandchildren. Okay. And the only way that they can see them, in most cases, is either a text message, okay, or on the phone. And these days, young kids do not answer the phone, and it's all text messaging and so forth. And I said, it'd be interesting writing a book for grandparents that when they do meet their grandchildren, they can read to them. And I said, well, that's not good enough. But what happens if I produce a series of questions in the book that the grandparent can read and say, okay, how does a cat sweat? Okay.
Yes.
Or why can't I change my name? Okay. Or why can't I go and live with my Zeta or my Opa, my Oma, and so forth and so on. And the whole idea was for the young child to say, I don't know how a cat sweats. Let's look it up together.
Yes.
Okay. And find out. So it brought the grandparent to the grandchild in a way that normally it wouldn't be done. Okay. And that was fun writing. And I had a very good illustrator at the time who produced some pretty good artistic work on it for me too.
Have you had a good response to it?
At the beginning, yes. But like everything else, if you don't push it, it's very, very difficult. And I moved on to other things. But I just wanted to show individuals that, hey, there is something out there that is available between a grandparent and a grandchild, young, who could hardly read, right? But sure, bloody good on the computer to look up these things. And at that time, I was kind of quite successful in it. But I haven't done anything with the book for quite some time.
What I liked about you and what I like about you is that you have a very fertile imagination.
Really?
I think it's very fertile. I think it's appropriate to say that you're childlike in nature, of which I would refer to myself that way as well. To the extent that last week you and I attended a storytelling session together, and prior to that storytelling session, you said to me, Avrum, during the session when you're speaking, when you're telling your stories, I'm going to make funny faces at you. And I said, man, that is perfect. Do it. Make funny faces at me. Did you make faces at me? I was so ensconced in what I was doing.
Well, you were wearing your dark glasses for most of the time. So, I mean, you didn't see, let's face it.
Right.
But
right.
I recommend, if they're going to continue with those events, I reckon that they should promote them because they go very well. We all sat around a circle. There were many people there.
Yeah,
and we told personal kind of stories. And your story was about your life in Kitchener and how you grew up and so forth. And it was fascinating. And we get to know people that way. And again, as I'm mentioning a number of times, we need some joy and fun in our lives at the present time.
Yes,
and if that was one way to do it, as you produce your podcast, this is the way to do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Simons is a writer, amongst other things. You can find a lot of his writing in Substack. including an article he wrote, My American Friends Over the Next 4 Years, Who Will Be There For You? Another fascinating article in Newfoundland and Labrador, Know Your Butts from Your Butts and Bobbers.
Well, you've got to be from that part of the province to know what that is.
I
But
love the way you play with words. It's wonderful.
thank you.
The Gaza Strip, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And you've written in the Times of Israel, oh, America, my world is also your world. So, folks, look up Alan's writing on Substack. Now, one of the things that I've been doing over the last few months is calling upon AI, artificial intelligence, to write a poem about my guests. And I've done that today. So I have an ode to Alan Simons. This is about you, Alan. You ready? Hold on tight.
Take that off.
Yeah, take off your headphones. Exactly. Alan Simons, a voice so bold, a writer with stories yet untold. Through pages of power, through words of might, he champions justice, stands for the right. A social ally, a beacon of change with heart and purpose. He's never strange, fighting for truth in every space, building the world we all can embrace. For 16 years, his news had flown, a service for the world to be known, an ambassador in Rwanda's land with wisdom and grace. He took a stand. He writes of justice, of hope, of care, a world more equal beyond compare. With every article, his voice rings clear, a call to action for those who hear. Through the pen and page, his work ignites a world of compassion, setting sights on unity, progress, hearts that see, a future shaped by harmony. Alan Simons, a name that stands for every soul in distant lands, an advocate, a guide, a light so true. In every word, he'll see us through. What do you think?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's an ode to you, Alan. And I want to thank you very much for being with me here today. It took us a little while to get this happening, but ultimately we stayed in the game and we made it happen. And it was worth every moment of it. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful.
Shakir, thank you so much.
You should go to you too. Yeah, it was lovely. Lovely.
Be well.
If people want to find your books or your writings, where can they do that, Alan?
I think the easiest way is go to alansimons.com.
Okay.
And you'll see my website. You can purchase it, a number of the books are at most bookstores. Okay. They may not have it in, but they can get it for you within days. And at Canada's leading bookstore, you can order it there and they will either deliver it for you. And also at Amazon. All my books are on Amazon. But go on to Alan L. Simons at .com and you can find it all there. Or Alan L. Simons at wordpress.com, or even go to Substack. I'm not good at promoting myself, especially on media. So check. You can even do a Google search on Alan L. Simons on Google search, and you'll find most of my stuff there.
Wonderful. So you can find you pretty much everywhere.
And I wish I could find myself sometimes too. Yeah.
Don't we all, Alan? Don't we all? By the way, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I painted this piece. It's called The Woman at the Western Wall, and it's acrylic on canvas, and it's available for sale if you like. I know that I had mentioned it. I know that I had. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me today with my dear friend Alan Simons. I often say at the end of my interviews that the reason for what we do here is to inspire individuals to pay homage to humankind. And as Alan said during the interview, it's extraordinarily important that we have fun, that we find things that are soft and fluffy, that we joke around, that we can enjoy our friendships. And I think what you can take out of this interview with Alan, he clearly is a man of the world, and he's someone who loves adventure. And that happened when he was young, and he came from England to Canada, and he became a writer, and he became an ambassador of Canada to Rwanda. And he's done so many different things. His resume is so eclectic in nature. Take that out of this conversation. Take that out of Alan's life and find it for yourself. Find your gift. Find your talent. And eventually what happens is when you ensconce yourself in that particular thing, that matana, as they say in Hebrew, that gift, you find yourself being in the zone, and happiness comes, and purpose and meaning arrive at your doorstep. So I suggest very, very strongly that when you listen to this interview, listen to it again and take out of it something from this lovely man, which really reflects a hunger for life, for adventure, for learning, for experience. Until we meet again, my friends, we say in Yiddish, sei gesinnt. Do you know Yiddish, Alan?
A little, yes.
What does sei gesinnt mean?
Blessings to you, best wishes, be well, everything like that.
Can you say be well in Rwandan or something like that?
No, I can't.
Okay,
I
well,
do.
don't take that.
Well, first of all, it's Kenya Rwandan. That's the language, not Rwandan.
Okay.
Kenya Rwandan. And
My mistake.
Amurahu, I will say Amurahu, which
Amurahu.
means Amurahu, right.
All right, sei gesinnt.
And
It does be done, yeah.
Ciao.
It's all good. We shall see you soon. Thank you so much for joining.